What happens when a powerful CEO uncovers corruption within her own company, and the man behind it will stop at nothing to take her down? Betrayal, redemption, and a fight for justice collide in this gripping story of courage and transformation. Will she rise above or fall victim to the system she's trying to change? Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The late November air was crisp, carrying a faint scent of evergreen from the freshly adorned garlands hanging along Rodeo Drive. Strings of white and gold lights wrapped around the lampposts glimmered against the setting sun, creating a scene of quiet opulence. Luxury cars like Bentleys and Rolls-Royces lined the curb, their polished exteriors reflecting the festive glow. The melodic hum of a saxophone echoed through the street as a street performer played jazz standards, drawing small crowds of admirers. Shoppers, clad in designer coats and scarves, strolled leisurely with shopping bags embossed with the names of the world's most elite brands. Inside one of these stores, a boutique with gleaming glass windows showcasing handbags that cost more than the average person's monthly salary, the air was perfumed with a subtle blend of bergamot and leather. Amara Johnson stepped through the doors, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She was dressed simply in a tailored blazer and slacks, the kind of outfit that exuded quiet professionalism without drawing unnecessary attention. Her dark brown skin glowed under the warm lights, and her curly hair was pulled back into a neat bun. Amara had built this boutique and others like it from the ground up. 10 years ago, she had stood outside similar shops, dreaming of a day when she could walk in without the weight of financial constraints or the stigma of being judged. Now she owned this place. And yet she felt an old, familiar tension creeping in as she observed her surroundings. She paused near a display table showcasing limited edition handbags in soft pastel shades. Each piece bore intricate stitching and golden accents that whispered luxury. Amara ran her fingers lightly over the edge of one bag, noting the craftsmanship. Despite her calm exterior, her mind was abuzz. She was here unannounced, not as the CEO but as an ordinary customer, determined to see firsthand how her staff treated those who didn't fit the stereotypical mold of their clientele. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the manager, a sharply dressed man in his early 40s with slick-back blonde hair. Ethan Wallace, she recalled, had been hired just under a year ago. His resume was impressive, boasting years of experience in high-end retail. Yet as Amara observed him from a distance, her stomach tightened. Ethan was speaking animatedly with a woman draped in an elegant white coat, her hand adorned with diamonds. He laughed at her jokes, his body language open and attentive. When another customer, a young black woman in jeans and sneakers, hesitated near the same counter, Ethan's expression subtly shifted. His smile thinned, and his gaze turned cold. He nodded curtly at one of the sales associates to assist her, but his attention never lingered. Amara took a deep breath and continued her silent assessment. As she moved toward another display, a young salesperson approached her hesitantly. "Hi, ma'am. Can I help you with something?" Her voice was polite but lacked the warmth she had observed moments earlier when other customers were greeted. "No, thank you. Just looking," Amara replied, her tone neutral. The salesperson nodded, her smile fading as she quickly retreated to another part of the store. Amara couldn't ignore the unease settling in her chest. This wasn't the first time she had noticed discrepancies in how customers were treated, but experiencing it firsthand felt different. She glanced toward Ethan again. His eyes briefly met hers before darting away, but not before a flicker of something unspoken crossed his face. Suspicion, perhaps, or dismissiveness. Amara moved to the far corner of the store, where a glass case displayed their most exclusive collection. She leaned closer, studying the details of a black leather handbag, accented with brushed silver. It was a piece she had personally approved during the design phase. "What brings you here today?" Amara turned to see Ethan standing a few feet away. His tone was even, his smile professional, but faintly strained. "Just browsing," Amara replied simply. Ethan's eyes lingered on her attire, his gaze calculating. "Well, let us know if you need assistance," he said, his words clipped. "Of course," she said, matching his tone. As Ethan walked away, Amara felt the weight of his scrutiny. It was subtle, but she had seen it countless times before, in meetings, at networking events, even in her early days of pitching her business to investors. That unspoken question, do you belong here? The thought made her stomach churn. For years, she had fought to prove herself in an industry dominated by people who looked nothing like her. She had broken barriers, shattered ceilings, and yet moments like these reminded her of the uphill battle that still lay ahead. Her focus shifted back to the glass case in front of her. The handbag she had been admiring now seemed symbolic, a product of her vision, her labor, and yet even here, in a space she had created, she felt like an outsider. A soft murmur of laughter brought her attention back to Ethan. He was speaking to another employee, his eyes flicking toward Amara as he whispered something that made the other person glance nervously in her direction. Amara straightened her posture. This visit was meant to be an observation, but it seemed it would become something more. Amara's fingers brushed over the soft leather of the handbag she had been admiring earlier, tracing the delicate stitching that curved seamlessly along its edges. It was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, and she felt a brief flicker of pride knowing she had played a part in its creation. She lifted the bag gently, testing its weight and balance, when a voice broke the stillness behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am," Ethan said, his tone polite yet laced with an edge of condescension. Amara turned to face him, her expression calm but questioning. Ethan's sharp blue eyes flicked to the handbag in her hands, then back to her. "We do have a selection of items that might be more suitable. They're over on that side." He gestured toward a smaller display near the entrance, where the lower-priced accessories were showcased. Amara tilted her head slightly, holding his gaze. "I'm fine with this one, thank you. Just taking a closer look." Ethan's lips tightened into a thin smile. "Of course. It's just that this particular piece is part of our premium collection. It's priced at $8,500. Perhaps I could show you something a bit more." He paused as if searching for the right word, but the implication hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Amara felt a spark of heat rise in her chest, though her expression remained composed. "I'm aware of the price. I'm simply evaluating the craftsmanship. Is that a problem?" Her tone, steady and unyielding, seemed to catch Ethan off guard. He hesitated, his professional facade wavering for just a moment before he recovered. "Not at all," he replied quickly, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Amara returned her attention to the bag, but she could feel his eyes on her. The weight of his judgment was palpable, pressing against her like a physical force. She knew this feeling too well, the subtle but persistent question of whether she belonged, whether she deserved to be here. Moments later, Ethan's voice cut through the air again, sharper this time. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to put the bag down." Amara looked up, her brow furrowing. "Excuse me. We've had some issues recently with individuals mishandling merchandise," he said, his words measured but his meaning clear. "It's company policy to ensure our products remain in pristine condition." Amara felt her grip tighten on the bag, though she quickly loosened it, not wanting to give him any ammunition. "I've handled this with the utmost care," she said, her voice firm but calm. "I don't see any reason to put it down unless I decide I don't want it." Ethan's expression hardened. He glanced over his shoulder and nodded at one of the security guards stationed near the entrance. The guard, a stocky man with a no-nonsense demeanor, began walking toward them. Amara's heart quickened, but she forced herself to remain composed. She could feel the eyes of the other customers on her now, their curiosity piqued by the tension in the air. Ethan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make his words feel like a private threat. "We've had a few incidents lately," he said. "I hope you understand, but I need to ensure there's no misunderstanding here." Amara's jaw tightened. She set the bag down carefully on the glass counter and took a step back, her hands at her sides. "If you're implying something, Mr. Wallace, I suggest you say it outright." Ethan blinked, surprised she knew his name, but quickly masked his reaction. "I'm merely doing my job, ma'am." He turned to the approaching security guard. "Could you assist me here? I believe we need to call the authorities." The words sent a ripple of unease through the store. Customers murmured among themselves, some stepping closer to watch the unfolding drama. Amara stood her ground, her expression unreadable, though her pulse raced beneath the surface. The guard stopped a few feet away, his gaze shifting uncertainly between Ethan and Amara. "Is there an issue?" Ethan nodded. I suspect this customer might be preparing to take an item without proper authorization. Amara's breath caught in her chest, but she exhaled slowly, steadying herself. She locked eyes with Ethan, her voice steady but edged with steel. You're accusing me of theft? I didn't say that, Ethan replied smoothly, though the implication was clear. The guard hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Ma'am, would you mind stepping aside while we sort this out? Amara squared her shoulders, refusing to budge. I'm not going anywhere. And unless you have evidence to support this absurd accusation, I suggest you think carefully about your next move. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant notes of jazz drifting in from outside. A moment later, the sound of sirens broke the tension, growing louder as a police car pulled up outside. Two officers entered the store, their presence adding a new layer of gravity to the situation. Amara's heart pounded, but she met their gaze head-on as they approached. Is there a problem here? One of the officers asked, his tone professional but firm. Ethan stepped forward, his confidence bolstered by their arrival. Yes, officers. I believe this woman was attempting to steal one of our items. I thought it best to involve you before the situation escalated. Amara felt a surge of anger flare within her, but she forced it down, refusing to let him see her break. That's a lie, she said calmly. I'm a paying customer, just like anyone else in the store. The officers glanced between her and Ethan, their expressions unreadable. Amara's mind raced, a storm of emotions swirling beneath her composed exterior. She had faced obstacles before, but this, being publicly humiliated and treated like a criminal, cut deeper than she had anticipated. In the corner of her eye, she noticed one of the younger employees, Mary Collins, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of fear and unease. Their eyes met briefly, and Amara saw something flicker there, an unspoken apology perhaps, or a plea for forgiveness. But there was no time to dwell on it. The situation had reached a boiling point, and Amara knew she would need every ounce of her strength to navigate what was to come. Amara stood in the center of the boutique, the weight of the unfolding scene pressing heavily on her chest. Her hands remained steady at her sides, but the storm brewing inside her threatened to break free. The humiliated stares from the other customers and the calculating look in Ethan's eyes weren't unfamiliar. She had seen them before, in boardrooms where her ideas were dismissed, in networking events where her presence was questioned, and during the early days of her career when rejection seemed to follow her every move. Her mind flickered back to the first boutique she had tried to pitch her designs to. The manager, a woman with a clipped accent and an air of superiority, had barely glanced at her portfolio before shaking her head. We're looking for something more refined, the woman had said, her tone dripping with polite dismissal. That same echo of judgment now reverberated through Ethan's carefully measured words and actions. The police officers, two men in neatly pressed uniforms, stood a few feet away, their expressions neutral, but their presence intimidating nonetheless. One of them stepped forward, clipboard in hand. Ma'am, we need to see some identification, he said evenly. Amara's pulse quickened. She reached into her purse slowly, not wanting to escalate the situation further. As she retrieved her wallet, she noticed Ethan's smirk, a subtle, smug curve of his lips that sent a fresh wave of anger through her. What exactly am I being accused of? Amara asked, her voice calm but firm. Ethan stepped forward, addressing the officers directly. She's been handling one of our high-value items for an extended period. I asked her to set it down multiple times, but she's been reluctant. Given the circumstances, I thought it best to involve you. The officer nodded slightly, scribbling something on his clipboard. Ma'am, this is just standard procedure. If you have nothing to hide, there's no need to worry. Amara handed over her ID, her jaw tightening as she watched Ethan's posture shift into one of feigned professionalism. There's no need for this, she said evenly. I was simply examining a product. If that's a crime, you should be questioning everyone else in this store as well. Ethan let out a dry chuckle. You're being defensive, ma'am. I'm just following protocol. Amara wanted to snap back, to remind him who she was and the authority she held. But she bit down on the urge, deciding that revealing her identity in anger would only diminish her position. Instead, she glanced toward Mary Collins, the young sales associate who had been watching from the edge of the room. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, Amara saw a mix of guilt and hesitation flicker across Mary's face. Mary shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Ethan and the officers. Amara could see the internal battle waging within her, the desire to speak up against the injustice versus the fear of retaliation. One of the officers returned Amara's ID, nodding slightly. "Everything checks out," he said, "but Mr. Wallace here seems to think there's more to this situation." Ethan seized the opportunity, his voice dripping with authority. Her behavior was suspicious from the moment she walked in. "I've been trained to spot these things, and I'm confident in my assessment." Amara's nails dug into her palms as she fought to maintain her composure. She had endured years of microaggressions and outright discrimination to get to where she was. But this public humiliation felt like a slap in the face. Before she could respond, the sound of the boutique's entrance chiming drew everyone's attention. A tall, impeccably dressed man walked in, his confident stride and easy smile immediately catching the room's attention. Amara recognized him instantly, Daniel Kingston, a well-known entrepreneur and longtime client of her brand. "Amara!" Daniel's voice rang out warmly as he approached her. "I didn't know you were in town. It's always a pleasure to see you." Ethan's expression froze, his eyes darting between Amara and Daniel. The officers exchanged glances, clearly caught off guard by the sudden shift in dynamic. "Daniel," Amara replied, a faint smile breaking through her otherwise guarded demeanor. "It's good to see you too. I wasn't expecting to run into anyone I knew." Daniel chuckled, glancing at the officers and Ethan. "Is everything all right here? I'd hate to think there's been a misunderstanding involving one of the most accomplished people I know." Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came out. His confidence seemed to deflate under Daniel's scrutiny. I wasn't aware," he stammered, his polished facade cracking. The officers, sensing the tension, stepped back slightly. "We were just responding to a call," one of them said carefully. "If there's no issue here, we'll be on our way." Amara nodded politely at the officers, though her gaze never left Ethan. "I think we've cleared everything up," she said calmly. As the officers left, Ethan stood frozen in place, his face pale and his jaw clenched. Daniel turned to him with a raised eyebrow. "I assume you'll be apologizing to Miss Johnson now?" he said, his tone light but laced with an unmistakable edge. Ethan swallowed hard, his gaze shifting to Amara. I didn't realize." "You didn't realize," Amara repeated, her voice measured. She met his gaze steadily, letting the silence linger before finally speaking again. "Don't worry, Mr. Wallace. I'll be sure to explain everything. Soon." Ethan's face flushed, and he nodded stiffly before retreating toward the back of the store. Amara watched him go, her mind already working through the next steps. Daniel gave her a knowing smile. "You handled that well, but I suspect you're far from done here." "You're right," Amara replied, her tone resolute. "This is just the beginning." The tension in the boutique lingered even after the police officers had left. Customers pretended to return to their shopping, but their eyes continued to dart toward Amara, unable to resist sneaking glances at the woman who had so effortlessly stood her ground. Ethan had disappeared into the back of the store, leaving the rest of the staff in an awkward silence. Amara stood near the display case, her composure outwardly intact, though her mind was a flurry of emotions. The humiliation she had just endured, the subtle and overt signs of discrimination. It wasn't unfamiliar, but it stung no less. She was here to observe, to understand the culture within her company, but the experience was harsher than she anticipated. Ms. Johnson?" The soft voice startled her. Amara turned to see Mary, the young sales associate she had noticed earlier. The woman's face was pale, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "Yes?" Amara replied, her tone neutral but curious. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," Mary said, her voice trembling slightly, "for not stepping in earlier. I should have said something." Amara studied her for a moment, noting the genuine remorse in her expression. "Why didn't you?" she asked, her voice even but probing. Mary hesitated, glancing around the store as if afraid someone might overhear. "It's just, Mr. Wallace, he doesn't make it easy for any of us. If we question him, if we push back, he finds a way to make things Difficult. She swallowed hard, her voice dropping to a whisper. Especially for people like me. Amara's eyes narrowed. People like you? Mary nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. I'm not exactly what you'd call his ideal employee. I've seen how he treats customers and staff, and especially those of us who don't fit the image he wants for the store. He gets away with it because he's good at hiding it when it counts. But it's not right. None of it is. The confession hit Amara like a weight in her chest. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed only deepened her resolve. This wasn't just about her experience today. It was about a culture that allowed behavior like Ethan's to thrive. I appreciate you telling me this, Amara said, her voice softening. It takes courage to speak up, even now. Mary looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. You're not upset with me? Amara shook her head. No, Mary, but I do need your help. If you've seen this behavior before, I need to know more. The specifics, not just for me, but for everyone else who's been affected. Mary hesitated, then nodded slowly. I'll tell you everything I know, but please don't let him know I said anything. You have my word, Amara promised, her tone firm. Before their conversation could continue, Ethan reappeared, his expression a mask of forced calm. Ms. Johnson, he said smoothly, ignoring Mary entirely, I trust the situation has been resolved to your satisfaction? Amara tilted her head, her gaze steady. Not quite. I'd like to review the store's policies and procedures for handling incidents like this. Ethan blinked, clearly not expecting her response. Our policies? Ma'am, I assure you, everything I've done today is by the book. It's all part of maintaining the integrity of the brand. Then there shouldn't be any problem showing me those procedures, Amara replied, her voice cool but unyielding. Ethan faltered for a moment before recovering. Of course, I'll gather the necessary documents. As he turned to leave, Amara caught the slight tremor in his hand, a sign that his confidence was beginning to crack. Mary leaned in slightly, her voice barely audible. He's scared, she whispered. He should be, Amara replied, her tone sharp but quiet enough for only Mary to hear. A short while later, Ethan returned with a binder of printed documents. He placed it on the counter with a flourish, as if to emphasize his supposed transparency. Here you go, he said, flashing a tight smile. Feel free to review anything you'd like. Amara flipped through the pages slowly, her sharp eyes scanning each section. Policies on customer interactions, security protocols, staff conduct. It was all there, written in polished corporate language. But what stood out most was what wasn't there. The absence of any real accountability. The vague wording that left room for interpretation, for discretion that could be twisted into bias. These are interesting, Amara said, closing the binder with a soft thud. But I think we'll need to look a little deeper. Ethan's smile wavered. Deeper? What do you mean? I'd like a full audit of the store's operations, Amara said, her tone matter-of-fact. Customer service records, incident reports, employee feedback, all of it. If you're confident everything here is above board, then this should be a simple process. Ethan's face turned a shade paler. That seems excessive, he said, his voice tight. Excessive? Amara raised an eyebrow. Or necessary? The tension in the room was palpable. Ethan's polished exterior was beginning to fray, but Amara wasn't ready to let him unravel just yet. For now, she would play along, gathering the pieces she needed to expose not just Ethan's actions, but the deeper flaws within the system. She had built this company to be a symbol of inclusivity and excellence. If that vision had been compromised, she would tear it down and rebuild it herself. Ethan didn't realize it yet, but he was no longer in control of the situation. Ethan stood behind the counter, his jaw clenched tightly as he fiddled with a pen in his hand. His usual air of confidence was beginning to crumble under the pressure, but instead of retreating, he doubled down. His frustration was palpable, evident in the sharpness of his tone and the stiffness in his posture. Ms. Johnson, he began, his voice cutting through the hum of low conversations in the boutique. I understand your concerns, but this store has a reputation to maintain. We serve a very specific clientele, and it's my responsibility to ensure that nothing, absolutely nothing, damages the image we've worked so hard to build. Amara remained composed, her arms loosely crossed as she stood across from him. She raised an eyebrow slightly but didn't interrupt. Ethan mistook her silence for an opening to press further. "This is not about you personally," he continued, his words laced with a poorly concealed disdain. "It's about maintaining standards. We can't afford to have incidents that reflect poorly on the brand, especially when they involve questionable behavior." "Questionable behavior?" Amara repeated calmly, her voice so steady it almost unnerved him. Ethan hesitated, realizing he might have stepped too far. "What I mean is, we have to be cautious. Any misunderstanding could spiral out of control, and it's my job to prevent that." Amara tilted her head slightly, her gaze unyielding. "And calling the police on a paying customer is your idea of preventing a misunderstanding?" Ethan's composure wavered, but he quickly masked it with a dismissive wave of his hand. "I acted within policy. If anything, I was protecting the integrity of this establishment. We can't let one misstep tarnish everything we built here." Amara took a slow breath, suppressing the urge to respond with the full force of her anger. She had learned long ago that staying calm often unnerved people far more than shouting ever could. "I see," she said simply. "Please continue." Ethan faltered for a moment, unsure how to interpret her response. He glanced around, realizing that the other employees, and even a few lingering customers, were watching the exchange with quiet intensity. Before he could say more, a soft chime interrupted the tension. One of the younger employees at the front of the store glanced nervously at her phone, then at Ethan. "What is it?" he snapped, his irritation spilling over. The employee hesitated before speaking. "There's a video, sir. It's being shared online. Someone recorded what happened earlier." Ethan's face went pale. "What do you mean, someone recorded it?" The employee bit her lip, holding up her phone. "It's already getting a lot of views. People are commenting, saying the store was discriminatory." Amara's eyes flicked toward the phone, but she didn't reach for it. Instead, she allowed the moment to hang in the air, watching as Ethan's confidence unraveled further. Ethan snatched the phone, his eyes scanning the screen. The color drained from his face as he watched the footage. Him confronting Amara, the condescending tone in his voice unmistakable, and the police officers arriving shortly after. The caption beneath the video read, "Racial profiling at a luxury boutique? Disgraceful." His hands trembled slightly as he handed the phone back. This is completely out of context," he stammered. "They don't know the full story. This could ruin everything." Amara's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "You mean it could ruin your carefully curated image?" Ethan's head snapped up, his expression a mixture of anger and desperation. "Do you have any idea what this could do to the store's reputation? We'll be swarmed with bad press, boycotts. The higher-ups won't stand for this." "Perhaps they shouldn't," Amara replied coolly. "Maybe it's time the higher-ups took a closer look at how their stores are being managed." Ethan opened his mouth to retort, but stopped himself, his frustration boiling just beneath the surface. Meanwhile, the murmurs among the remaining customers grew louder. Some of them had already seen the video, their phones buzzing with notifications as it continued to gain traction online. The weight of public scrutiny was already settling over the boutique, and Amara could see the fear in Ethan's eyes. A young woman near the entrance, clearly emboldened by the situation, stepped forward and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I've shopped here before, and this isn't the first time I've noticed the staff treating people differently based on how they look." Her words sent a ripple through the room. Several other customers nodded in agreement, their whispers growing louder. Ethan's jaw tightened as he realized the situation was slipping completely out of his control. Amara took a small step forward, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "It seems this isn't just an isolated incident, Mr. Wallace. And if that's the case, then the reputation you're so worried about has been damaged far longer than you'd like to admit." Ethan turned to her, his frustration now replaced with something closer to panic. "You don't understand," he said, his voice lowering as he tried to regain some semblance of authority. "This store is my responsibility. Everything I've done is for the good of the brand." "And yet," Amara replied, her tone icy, "it's clear that your definition of good is deeply flawed." The weight of her words hung in the air as the murmurs quieted. Ethan looked around, his gaze darting from the employees to the customers, then back to Amara. For the first time, he seemed truly cornered. Amara didn't press further. She didn't need to. The seeds had already been planted, and she knew they would grow into something far larger than this single confrontation. "I think we're done here, for now," she said, her voice calm but final. "But don't worry, Mr. Wallace. This is only the beginning." The video of the confrontation spread across social media like wildfire. Within hours, the footage had been shared on countless platforms, accompanied by hashtags like number racial profiling and number luxury bias. Influencers weighed in, activists called for accountability, and news outlets began picking up the story. Headlines ranged from luxury boutique under fire for alleged discrimination to viral video exposes racial bias in high-end retail. Amara sat in her quiet home office, her phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. Messages poured in from colleagues, friends, and even strangers who had recognized her in the video. She scrolled through the comments online, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, exhaustion, and determination. "This is unacceptable," one commenter wrote. "How many more times do we have to see this happen before real change occurs?" Another chimed in, "Boycott this store until they clean house." No one deserves to be treated like this. The public outrage was both validating and overwhelming. Amara had wanted to observe the culture in her company, to identify issues and address them quietly. But now the situation had escalated far beyond her initial plan. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Daniel Kingston, the entrepreneur who had come to her aid at the store. "I saw the video," Daniel said without preamble. "It's everywhere, Amara. People are furious." "I know," she replied, her voice calm but tinged with fatigue. "I've been watching it unfold all day." "What's your next move?" he asked. Amara hesitated. She had spent hours deliberating. Should she reveal her identity and take control of the narrative? Or should she let the fire burn itself out while working behind the scenes to implement change? "I'm not sure yet," she admitted. "But one thing is clear. This is bigger than me. This is about the culture we've allowed to exist, and it's time to confront it head on." Daniel paused before replying, his tone supportive. "Whatever you decide, I've got your back. Let me know how I can help." "Thank you, Daniel," she said sincerely. Meanwhile, at the boutique, Ethan paced the floor of his office, his phone pressed to his ear. He had called the regional manager twice already, leaving frantic voicemails that grew more desperate with each attempt. "This is a nightmare," Ethan muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. "They're going to blame me for all of this." He tried dialing again, but there was no answer. The regional manager, like the rest of the corporate team, was notoriously difficult to reach during moments of crisis. Unbeknownst to Ethan, the person he truly needed to contact was sitting in her office, quietly strategizing. Amara had remained intentionally silent, watching as the situation unfolded. She knew Ethan was scrambling to save himself, and she wanted him to feel the weight of his actions before she made her next move. By the following morning, Amara had made her decision. She called for an emergency meeting at the boutique, instructing her assistant to ensure that all staff members, including Ethan, were present. When the time came, the employees filed into the small conference room at the back of the store, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. Ethan stood near the head of the table, his demeanor unusually subdued. "I've called this meeting to address the recent events," Ethan began, his voice strained but authoritative. "As many of you know, a video involving this store has gone viral. The allegations being made against us are serious, and they require immediate attention." He glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on Mary, who sat quietly near the back. "Let me be clear," Ethan continued, "this store operates under strict guidelines. What happened was an unfortunate misunderstanding, but we will take steps to ensure it doesn't happen again." Just as he finished speaking, the door to the conference room opened. All heads turned as Amara entered, her presence commanding yet calm. She walked to the front of the room, her expression unreadable. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his confusion evident. Amara ignored his question, instead turning to address the room. "Good morning, everyone," she said evenly. "I've called this meeting because it's time for transparency and accountability. What happened here wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a failure of leadership and culture." Ethan's face turned a shade paler as realization began to dawn on him. You, you called this meeting? Amara met his gaze, her voice steady. That's right. I'm Amara Johnson, founder and CEO of this company. A stunned silence fell over the room. Employees exchanged wide-eyed glances, and Ethan visibly struggled to compose himself. I had no idea, he stammered, his confidence evaporating. I know, Amara said coolly. That's exactly why I came here unannounced. I wanted to see how this store operates without the filter of corporate oversight, and what I've seen is unacceptable. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but Amara held up a hand to stop him. You'll have a chance to speak later. For now, I suggest you listen. She turned her attention back to the rest of the staff. This isn't just about one incident. It's about a culture that allows bias and discrimination to go unchecked. That ends today. The employees sat in stunned silence, their attention fixed on Amara. Ethan, meanwhile, sank into his chair, his earlier bravado completely gone. Amara knew there was still much to do, but for the first time since the confrontation began, she felt the balance of power shift firmly into her hands. The room remained engulfed in stunned silence, the weight of Amara's revelation settling over everyone like a dense fog. Ethan's face was frozen, his mouth slightly open, as if he was about to speak but couldn't find the words. The employees seated around the table looked at each other, confusion and disbelief etched on their faces. Amara stood tall at the head of the room, her calm yet commanding presence impossible to ignore. Her gaze shifted from one employee to the next, silently taking in their reactions. Now that you know who I am, she began, her voice steady and deliberate, it's time for some honesty, not just from Mr. Wallace, but from all of you. Ethan snapped out of his stupor, his hands gripping the edge of the table tightly. Ms. Johnson, I had no idea you were… if I had known… Amara cut him off with a sharp glance. If you had known, what? That you were speaking to the person who built this company from the ground up? That you were calling the police on someone who owns every item in this store? Ethan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I was only doing my job, following protocol, he stammered. Protocol? Amara repeated, her tone laced with incredulity. Is it protocol to humiliate and profile a customer based on your own biases? To create a hostile environment for employees who don't meet your arbitrary standards? Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his gaze darting toward the exit, as if he were contemplating making a run for it. Amara turned her attention to the rest of the staff. This isn't just about Ethan. I need to know the truth. What's been happening here, and why no one has spoken up until now. The room was quiet for a moment, the employees exchanging hesitant glances. Finally, Mary stood up, her hands trembling slightly but her voice firm. I'll speak, she said, her eyes meeting Amara's. Amara nodded, silently encouraging her to continue. Mary took a deep breath. Working here has been hard. Mr. Wallace has made it clear that he values appearances above all else. If you don't fit his idea of what a luxury employee should look like, he makes your life miserable. He assigns you the worst shifts, criticizes everything you do, and makes you feel like you're disposable. Ethan's face flushed red. That's not true. I've treated everyone fairly. Fairly? Mary interrupted, her voice rising with a mixture of anger and courage. You told me I wasn't polished enough to represent the brand? You said I should work on my diction if I wanted to be taken seriously. Do you know how humiliating that was? The other employees murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement. Amara raised her hand, and the room fell silent again. Thank you for speaking up, Mary, she said sincerely. Your courage won't go unnoticed. Ethan's panic was now visible in every fiber of his being. Ms. Johnson, I can explain, he sputtered. I was trying to maintain the store's reputation. High-profile clients expect a certain level of service. And do those high-profile clients also expect to bypass company policies? Amara interrupted, her voice sharp. Ethan froze. What are you talking about? Amara leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. I've been conducting my own investigation, Mr. Wallace, and it seems you've been accepting payments under the table from certain customers in exchange for special treatment. Access to limited edition items, skipping wait lists, private shopping appointments, all in direct violation of company policy. Gas rippled through the room. Ethan's face turned a deep shade of crimson as he stammered incoherently. "Do you deny it?" Amara pressed, her tone unrelenting. I, I, no, but Ethan began, but Amara held up a hand to stop him. "That's all I needed to hear," she said coldly. "Your actions haven't just damaged this store. They've damaged the entire brand. And for that, there will be consequences." The room was silent once more, the employees too shocked to speak. Amara straightened, her gaze sweeping across the room. "This isn't just about one person," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "This is about a system that allowed behavior like this to go unchecked. A system that prioritizes profits over people, appearances over integrity. That ends today." She turned back to Ethan. "You're suspended effective immediately. An internal audit will be conducted, and the findings will determine your future with this company." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but the look in Amara's eyes silenced him. Amara looked at the rest of the employees. "As for the rest of you, I want to hear your stories, your experiences. If there are other issues we need to address, now is the time to bring them to light." The employees exchanged uncertain glances, but Mary stood taller, her courage inspiring others to follow suit. As the meeting adjourned, Amara felt the weight of the responsibility ahead of her. She had uncovered the cracks in the foundation of her company, and now it was up to her to rebuild it, stronger than before. The conference room was quiet after the tense meeting had adjourned, but Amara stayed behind, her thoughts swirling. The revelations from Mary and the other employees were both shocking and expected. Ethan's actions were reprehensible, but what struck her most was how deeply the cracks in the system had spread. This wasn't just about one man abusing his power. It was about an environment that allowed such behavior to thrive. Amara gazed out of the window, the bustling street below a stark contrast to the stillness in her heart. The easy answer would be to fire Ethan immediately, to make an example out of him and show the world that her company didn't tolerate such behavior. But she knew that wouldn't address the root of the problem. Ethan was a symptom, not the disease. She turned back to the table, where the stack of employee reports sat waiting. The pages detailed patterns of bias, subtle acts of discrimination, and an unspoken hierarchy that had been reinforced by managers like Ethan. Her company, the brand she had poured her soul into, had drifted far from the vision she had once held so dearly. Taking a deep breath, Amara made her decision. Ethan would stay, for now. He would face the consequences, but not before she unraveled the full extent of the damage. Keeping him in place would allow her to investigate further, to understand the scope of what needed to change. The following morning, Amara called another meeting, this time addressing the entire store staff. Employees gathered in the main showroom, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Ethan stood off to the side, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a cautious silence. Amara stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "Yesterday was a turning point for this store, and for this company. What I've seen, what I've heard, is unacceptable, but it's also an opportunity for us to be better, to rebuild this brand into something we can all be proud of." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "Effective immediately, we will be implementing a company-wide initiative to address the issues that have been brought to light. This includes mandatory training on diversity and inclusion, new policies to ensure fair treatment of all employees, and the establishment of an independent committee to oversee these changes." The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. "These changes won't happen overnight," Amara admitted, her tone softening, "and they won't be easy, but they are necessary, because this company was founded on the principles of excellence and integrity, and somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. It's time to get back to who we are and who we can be." There were murmurs among the staff, a mix of relief and uncertainty. Amara knew she couldn't win everyone over immediately, but she also knew that actions would speak louder than words. As the meeting concluded, Ethan lingered near the edge of the room, avoiding her gaze. Amara approached him directly, her expression unreadable. "You're not off the hook," she said quietly, "but I'm not firing you. Not yet. I want a full report of everything that's happened under your management. Every complaint, every incident, every questionable decision. You have until the end of the week." Ethan's face twitched, a mix of resentment and resignation. "Understood," he said tightly. "Good," Amara replied, "because this isn't just about you. It's about fixing a broken system. And whether you like it or not, you're going to be part of that process." As the day wore on, Amara threw herself into the work of rebuilding. She met with employees one-on-one, listened to their stories, and took meticulous notes. The picture that emerged was both heartbreaking and infuriating, a culture of favoritism and exclusion that had taken root in her absence. Meanwhile, Ethan's behavior began to shift. Under the pressure of Amara's scrutiny, he started revealing details he had previously kept hidden. Unethical practices, backdoor deals, and a network of favoritism that extended far beyond this single store. Amara listened carefully, piecing together the puzzle. She knew that exposing the truth would have consequences, not just for Ethan, but for the company as a whole. But she also knew it was the only way to move forward. By the end of the week, Amara had a plan. She would take the findings public, not to shame the company, but to set an example for the entire industry. The changes she was implementing wouldn't just fix the issues within her own brand. They would challenge the very foundations of how luxury retail operated. On Friday morning, Amara stood before her staff once again, a new sense of determination in her eyes. "This is the beginning of something bigger than all of us," she said. "We have the chance to be leaders, to set a standard that others will follow. And I promise you this, if we succeed, we won't just be a better company, we'll be a better community." The employees nodded, their expressions a mix of hope and determination. Ethan stood silently at the back of the room, his face pale but his posture resigned. He knew he had no choice but to comply, and to watch as the system he had once manipulated was dismantled before his eyes. As Amara stepped away from the group, she felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time, she was certain she was moving in the right direction. The hum of Amara's office felt louder than usual, a constant reminder of the storm swirling around her. She sat at her desk staring at her computer screen, where an email thread had spiraled into a series of complaints, accusations, and demands. Customers and employees alike had begun reaching out directly to corporate headquarters, their grievances ranging from microaggressions in stores to overt acts of discrimination. Her phone buzzed, pulling her attention momentarily. Another notification. This one a headline from a major news outlet. Luxury retail giant faces allegations of systemic discrimination. The article highlighted anonymous accounts of unfair treatment, poor management, and toxic workplace culture. Amara leaned back in her chair, pinching the bridge of her nose. She had anticipated backlash when she started this process, but the scope of the problems was far larger than she had imagined. The complaints weren't isolated to Ethan's store. They came from across the country, branches she had visited only occasionally, run by managers she had trusted to uphold her values. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her door. Her assistant, Naomi, stepped inside, her expression carefully neutral, but her voice tinged with urgency. "Ms. Johnson, another 5 emails just came in, 2 from former employees and 3 from current staff at different locations. They're saying the issues go back years." Amara nodded, her chest tightening. "Thank you, Naomi. Keep compiling everything. I want a full report by the end of the day." "Yes, ma'am." Naomi hesitated for a moment before adding, "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing." As the door closed, Amara felt the weight of Naomi's words settle over her. Was she doing the right thing? The changes she had announced were necessary, but they had also opened the floodgates. Every new complaint felt like another blow to the company's reputation, and to her own. Across the city, Ethan was navigating his own crisis. Though Amara had suspended him, he remained a presence in the store, his influence lingering like a shadow. In hushed conversations, he began planting seeds of doubt among the staff, whispering to those who were disillusioned or fearful of the changes ahead. "She's just making a spectacle," he told one employee, leaning casually against the counter. "Do you really think she's going to follow through? This is all about image. Give it a month and everything will go back to the way it was." His words found an audience among a handful of employees who felt alienated by the sudden shift in company culture. They nodded along, their expressions a mix of uncertainty and resentment. Ethan's strategy was clear. If he couldn't hold on to his position, he would at least create enough chaos to make Amara's job more difficult. Back at headquarters, Amara reviewed the mounting evidence of systemic issues within the company. The sheer volume of complaints was staggering. Former employees recounted being passed over for promotions, despite stellar performance reviews. Customers shared stories of being ignored or treated dismissively based on their appearance. The patterns were undeniable and deeply troubling. Amara had built this company to be a symbol of excellence and inclusivity, yet it had become something far different under her watch. She pressed her hands flat against the desk, steadying herself. The realization hit her hard. Fixing this wasn't just about saving the brand, it was about restoring its soul. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from one of the regional managers. Amara hesitated before answering, bracing herself for more bad news. "Ms. Johnson," the manager began, his voice tense, "I need to bring something to your attention. We've received complaints from two other stores in the region. The staff is saying there's been preferential treatment for certain clients, high-spending ones. They're accusing the managers of bending rules to accommodate them." Amara's stomach sank. How long has this been going on? Years, apparently, but the recent attention has encouraged people to speak up. "Thank you for letting me know," Amara said, her voice calm despite the storm raging inside her. "I'll handle it from here." As she hung up, the full picture began to emerge. This wasn't just about individual bad actors like Ethan. The problems were systemic, rooted in a culture that valued profits over principles. That evening, Amara sat in her living room, surrounded by stacks of reports and her laptop glowing faintly in the dim light. The weight of the situation bore down on her, but she knew there was no turning back. She opened a blank document and began drafting a company-wide address. Every word carried purpose, every sentence a step toward rebuilding trust. She wrote about accountability, about the need for transparency, and about her commitment to ensuring that the values she had built this company on would no longer be mere words on a mission statement. As she typed, her mind drifted back to the early days of her career, when she had dreamed of creating a brand that celebrated diversity and broke down barriers. That vision wasn't gone, she realized. It had simply been buried under layers of complacency and compromise. Now it was time to dig it out and bring it back to the surface. The air in the boardroom was heavy with tension as the internal investigation findings were laid out on the polished oak table. A thick stack of documents sat at the center, damning evidence that painted a clear picture of corruption and misconduct under Ethan's leadership. Amara sat at the head of the table, her expression unreadable, while Ethan sat 2 seats away, visibly uneasy. The lead investigator, a composed woman named Julia Marks, adjusted her glasses as she began to present the report. "Our investigation uncovered substantial evidence that Mr. Wallace not only engaged in discriminatory practices, but also participated in a network of unethical transactions," she said, her tone professional but firm. Murmurs rippled through the room, the senior executives exchanging glances of disbelief and concern. Amara remained silent, her gaze fixed on Ethan. Julia continued, flipping through the pages of the report. "Over the past 3 years, Mr. Wallace has accepted payments from high-profile clients in exchange for bypassing store policies. These include priority access to limited edition items, private shopping appointments, and even waiving return restrictions, actions that directly violated company protocol." Ethan's face turned a deep shade of red. "This is outrageous," he blurted, slamming his fist on the table. "I've done nothing but uphold the reputation of this company. These accusations are baseless." Julia remained unfazed. "We have documented evidence, including emails, transaction records, and testimonies from both customers and employees." She slid a folder across the table toward Amara, who opened it and scanned the contents. Ethan shifted in his seat, his bravado faltering. "This is a witch hunt," he said, his voice rising. "You're just trying to pin the company's problems on me to distract from the real issues." Amara closed the folder and folded her hands in front of her. Her voice was calm but laced with authority. "Ethan, the evidence speaks for itself. This isn't about distraction, it's about accountability. You violated not only company policy, but also the trust of your colleagues and customers. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. And what about you, Amara? You think you're some kind of hero, swooping in to fix everything? Let's not pretend this is purely altruistic. You're using this situation to make yourself look good, to build your brand as some champion of justice. The room fell silent, all eyes shifting between Ethan and Amara. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Amara's expression didn't waver. You're entitled to your opinion, she said evenly. But my actions aren't about appearances. They're about doing what's right. The culture you perpetuated under your leadership has harmed this company and the people who work here. That stops now. Ethan scoffed, leaning back in his chair. You can dress it up however you like, but the fact remains, you're just as ruthless as anyone else in this industry. And if you think you can take me down without consequences, you're mistaken. Amara arched an eyebrow. Is that a threat? Ethan smirked, his confidence returning. Let's just say I know things. Things about you, about your past. How do you think the public would react if they found out you weren't as perfect as you pretend to be? The words landed like a punch, but Amara didn't flinch. She had faced threats before, and she wasn't about to let Ethan derail her mission. Go ahead, she said, her voice steady. Do whatever you think will help you. But just know this. Every step you take to undermine me only reinforces why this change is necessary. You can't intimidate me, Ethan. Not anymore. The tension in the room was palpable as Ethan glared at her, his mind clearly racing. For a moment it seemed like he might say more, but instead he stood abruptly and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Amara exhaled quietly, her composure still intact. She turned back to the executives seated around the table. This is the kind of behavior we're working to eliminate, she said, her tone firm. It's not just about one person, it's about the culture we allow to exist. I need your support to make these changes, and I won't accept anything less than full commitment. The executives nodded, some more hesitantly than others. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and they knew there was no going back. As the meeting adjourned, Amara returned to her office, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Ethan's parting words lingered in her ears, a reminder that the road ahead would be anything but easy, but she refused to let fear dictate her actions. She sat at her desk and began drafting a statement to address the public. The company's reputation was on the line, and transparency was the only way forward. Outside her office, the city buzzed with life, oblivious to the battles being fought within the walls of her company. But Amara knew this fight wasn't just about her. It was about setting a standard, proving that change was possible even in an industry built on exclusivity and privilege. As the sun set over the skyline, Amara sent the statement to her communications team, ready to face whatever came next. The room was buzzing with reporters, their cameras and microphones ready to capture every word. Amara stood behind the podium, the bright lights from the press making her skin glow, but also highlighting the tension etched on her face. The air felt heavy with anticipation as everyone waited for her to speak. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment she would lay everything bare, not just for her company, but for herself. The accusations, the public scrutiny, the chaos, it had all led to this. Amara took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the podium to steady herself. Then she began. Good morning, and thank you all for being here, she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Today I want to address the recent events that have brought my company into the spotlight, but more importantly, I want to talk about the truth behind them. The room fell silent, every reporter leaning forward, their pens poised and ready. This company was built on the idea of inclusivity and excellence, Amara continued. I founded it because I believed in a vision, one where everyone, regardless of their background, could feel valued, respected, and seen. But somewhere along the way, that vision got lost, and for that, I take full responsibility. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. You see, I know what it feels like to be underestimated, to be judged not for who you are, but for what others assume about you. When I started my career in this industry, I faced countless rejections, not because my ideas weren't good enough, but because I didn't fit the image of what success was supposed to look like. Her voice softened, but the conviction behind it remained strong. I was told I didn't belong, that I would never make it. But instead of letting those words define me, I used them as fuel. I built this company not just as a business, but as a statement, a promise to others who have felt the same pain I did. Amara looked directly into the cameras now, her gaze unwavering. I understand the pain of discrimination because I've lived it, and that's why I won't stand by and let it happen within the walls of a company that bears my name. Today, I'm here to own up to the failures that have been exposed, not to make excuses, but to make amends. The room was completely still, the reporters hanging on her every word. Amara took another breath, feeling a sense of release as the truth finally spilled out. To those who have experienced injustice within my company, I want you to know that I hear you, I see you, and I will do everything in my power to ensure that this company becomes what it was always meant to be, a place of fairness, integrity, and respect. She straightened her posture, her voice rising with determination. I understand the skepticism. Some may think this is just damage control or a PR move, but let me be clear. This is personal to me. This is my legacy, and I will not let it be tarnished by the actions of a few who have betrayed the values we stand for. A murmur ran through the room as reporters exchanged glances. Amara knew the moment had come to address the elephant in the room. As for the individual at the center of these allegations, I can confirm that Ethan Wallace has been suspended, pending further investigation, she said, her voice firm. But this isn't just about one person. This is about creating a system where such behavior is impossible to begin with. That's why I'm announcing a series of reforms, effective immediately. She gestured to the screen behind her, which displayed a list of initiatives. Mandatory diversity and inclusion training, a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, and the establishment of an independent oversight committee to monitor workplace culture. These changes won't be easy, Amara admitted, her tone softening, but they are necessary because what's at stake isn't just the reputation of this company, it's the trust of every employee, every customer, and every person who looks to us as a symbol of progress. The reporters erupted into a flurry of questions, but Amara held up her hand. One more thing, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze piercing through the room. To those who have tried to undermine these efforts, to those who believe that change isn't possible, I have one message. We are just getting started, and no amount of resistance will stop us from doing what's right. The room burst into applause, a few reporters standing as they clapped. Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew this was just the beginning. Behind the scenes, Ethan watched the press conference from his phone, his jaw clenched tightly. The momentum was no longer in his favor, and he knew it. Still, he couldn't shake the bitterness festering inside him. Amara had taken control of the narrative, but he wasn't done yet. In the days that followed, more employees came forward with stories of Ethan's misconduct. Their testimonies painted a damning picture of a man who had abused his power for years, shielded by the complacency of those around him. Amara reviewed each account personally, her resolve hardening with every new piece of evidence. When the time came, she signed the final document authorizing Ethan's permanent dismissal. This isn't the end, she said to herself as she placed the pen down. It's the beginning of something better. The conference room felt charged, the air thick with the tension of unspoken alliances and veiled threats. Ethan sat at the head of the long table, flanked by a handful of employees he had carefully chosen. Those who either feared him, owed him favors, or shared his resentment toward the changes Amara had implemented. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the polished wood as he surveyed the room, his expression one of calculated confidence. We're at a crossroads, Ethan began, his voice calm but laced with urgency. Amara Johnson is taking this company in a direction that jeopardizes everything we've built. The culture, the clientele, the standards. She's dismantling it all under the guise of reform. The employees around him shifted uncomfortably, some nodding in agreement, while others avoided his gaze. She's not thinking about what's best for the company, Ethan continued. She's thinking about her image, her legacy, and we're the ones who are going to pay the price when it all falls apart. One employee, a middle-aged man named Richard, spoke up hesitantly. "What exactly are you suggesting, Ethan? That we go against her?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "I'm suggesting we push back. Let her know she doesn't have the support of everyone in this company. If enough of us stand together, we can force her to step down. She's a figurehead after all. Without the support of her team, she can't lead." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of Ethan's proposal sinking in. Before anyone could respond, the door to the conference room opened. Amara stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She was alone, her presence commanding despite the absence of any assistance or security. Her gaze swept across the room, lingering briefly on each face before settling on Ethan. "Am I interrupting?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. Ethan's composure faltered for a split second before he plastered on a tight smile. "Not at all, Ms. Johnson. We were just having a candid discussion about the direction of the company." "Good," Amara replied, closing the door behind her, "because I'd like to join that discussion." She walked to the opposite end of the table and took a seat, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. "I've been hearing rumors about dissatisfaction among the staff, concerns about the changes I'm implementing. I thought it might be time to address those concerns directly." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "It's not rumors, Amara. It's reality. People are unhappy. They're worried about the future of this company under your leadership." Amara tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanging. "Is that so? And do you speak for all of them?" Ethan gestured to the employees around the table. "I speak for those who believe in the traditions that made this company successful, the standards that our clients expect." "Traditions?" Amara repeated, her voice measured. "You mean the kind of traditions that exclude, discriminate, and prioritize profits over people?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're twisting my words. I'm talking about excellence, about maintaining the reputation we've worked so hard to build." Amara leaned forward slightly, her tone still calm, but now laced with steel. "Excellence isn't about exclusion, Ethan. It's about integrity. It's about building something that reflects the best of who we are, not the worst." Ethan's frustration boiled over. "And what exactly do you know about excellence, Amara? You've been too busy playing the hero to see what's really happening. Your so-called reforms are alienating our clients, driving away loyal employees, and tarnishing the very brand you claim to care about." Amara reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of papers, placing them on the table with deliberate care. "Let's talk about loyalty, Ethan. These are emails. Your emails, detailing payments you accepted from clients in exchange for preferential treatment, private shopping appointments, waiving return policies, bumping others off wait lists. Should we keep going?" The room fell silent, the weight of her words crashing down like a tidal wave. Ethan's face turned pale, his confident facade crumbling. "You think I'm out of touch?" Amara continued, her voice rising slightly. "I've been watching, listening, and what I've seen is a culture of corruption and manipulation that you've fostered under the guise of tradition. That ends today." Ethan shot to his feet, his voice trembling with anger. "You can't do this. You can't turn this company into your personal social experiment." Amara rose as well, her gaze unwavering. "This isn't an experiment. It's a correction, and you're no longer part of it." The finality of her words hung in the air as the employees looked on, their expressions a mix of shock and quiet relief. "Effective immediately, you are terminated from this company," Amara said, her tone firm but controlled. "Your actions have not only violated company policy, but also the trust of every person in this room. And let me make one thing clear. No one, not even me, is above the values this company stands for." Ethan stood frozen, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Amara looked around the table, meeting each employee's gaze. "This is a turning point," she said. "We can either cling to the past and let it destroy us, or we can move forward and build something better. The choice is yours." The room remained silent, but Amara could see the shift in their eyes, a flicker of hope, of possibility. As she walked out of the conference room, the tension in her chest began to ease. The hardest part was over, but the real work was just beginning. The headquarters main auditorium was filled to capacity, with employees from every level of the company gathered to hear what Amara had to say. The room buzzed with low murmurs, a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and cautious hope. A large screen displayed the company logo behind the podium where Amara would soon speak. She stood just behind the curtain, taking a deep breath as she rehearsed the key points of her speech in her mind. Today wasn't just about words, it was about taking tangible steps toward the future she envisioned for her company. A future that was inclusive, fair, and reflective of the values she had originally built it upon. When the room quieted, Amara walked onto the stage, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She approached the podium, her expression resolute but warm. Her gaze scanned the crowd, making brief eye contact with familiar and unfamiliar faces alike. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "I called this meeting today because we are at a pivotal moment in our company's history. Over the past few weeks, we have faced challenges that have tested our integrity and forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about who we are and who we want to be." The room was silent, all attention fixed on her. "I founded this company because I wanted to create something that celebrated excellence and diversity," she continued. "But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that vision. We allowed complacency and outdated practices to take root, and as a result, we failed to live up to the ideals we claimed to represent." Amara's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "That changes today. Effective immediately, we are implementing a series of reforms that will redefine who we are as a company." She gestured toward the screen behind her, which now displayed the first bullet point of her plan. "First, we are eliminating all discriminatory hiring practices. Our goal is to ensure that every individual who works for this company is evaluated based on their skills, talent, and potential, not their background, appearance, or any other superficial criteria." The room murmured in response, and Amara let the words settle before moving to the next point. "Second, we are introducing mandatory training programs focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. These sessions will be led by experts in the field, and participation will be required at every level, from our newest hires to our senior executives." A few employees exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of surprise and intrigue. "Third," Amara said, her tone sharpening, "we are establishing an independent oversight committee to monitor our progress and ensure accountability. This committee will be tasked with reviewing employee feedback, investigating complaints, and recommending further improvements to our policies and practices." She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to sink in. "These changes aren't just about damage control. They're about building a better foundation for the future. A future where every employee feels valued and respected. A future where our customers see us not just as a brand, but as a beacon of what's possible when integrity and inclusivity guide our actions." The screen behind her shifted, displaying the logo of a well-known nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing the rights of people of color in the retail industry. "To demonstrate our commitment, I'm proud to announce that we are entering into a partnership with this organization. Effective immediately, we will be providing financial support and resources to their efforts, helping to create opportunities for underrepresented individuals in the luxury retail space." Amara stepped away from the podium momentarily to sign a large ceremonial contract displayed on a nearby table. The cameras in the room clicked furiously as she penned her signature, a tangible symbol of the company's renewed commitment. The audience erupted into applause, some employees even standing as they clapped. Amara felt a wave of emotion rise within her, but maintained her composure. This moment wasn't about her. It was about the people in the room and the countless others her decisions would impact. Returning to the podium, she looked out at the crowd. "Change isn't easy," she said, her voice softening. "It requires us to look in the mirror and acknowledge the ways we've fallen short, but it also gives us the chance to be better, to do better. That's what today is about. Not just fixing what's broken, but building something stronger in its place." The applause grew louder, and Amara stepped back, letting the moment belong to the employees who had made it possible. In the back of the room, Mary stood with tears in her eyes, a quiet smile on her face as she clapped alongside her colleagues. As the crowd began to disperse, Amara felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning, she saw Naomi, her assistant, holding a tablet with a fresh batch of feedback from employees across the company. "You did it," Naomi said, her voice filled with admiration. Amara smiled, though her mind was already turning to the work ahead. "This is just the beginning," she replied. The morning was unusually quiet at the office. The tension that had loomed over the company for weeks seemed to dissipate with Ethan's departure. The employees moved through the halls with a newfound sense of ease, greeting one another with smiles that felt less forced. For the first time in a long while, the air was free from the weight of fear and distrust. Amara sat in her office, a steaming cup of tea resting on the desk in front of her. The past few weeks had been relentless, a whirlwind of revelations, confrontations, and decisions that had tested her resolve at every turn. Now she allowed herself a moment to reflect. Ethan's dismissal had been both inevitable and necessary. The evidence against him was irrefutable, and his toxic influence had left scars on the company that would take time to heal. His departure, however, was met with a mix of reactions. While many employees celebrated the change, others remained cautious, wary of what might come next. Amara understood their hesitation. Change, even positive change, was never easy. But as she reviewed the reports from various departments, she began to see glimmers of hope. Employees were participating in the new diversity training sessions with enthusiasm. Feedback from the Oversight Committee was overwhelmingly positive, with many noting a shift in the company's atmosphere. Her assistant Naomi entered the room with a stack of papers. "These are the latest updates from the regional managers," she said, placing the files on Amara's desk. "Thank you," Amara replied, flipping through the first report. It detailed an increase in employee engagement and a noticeable improvement in customer satisfaction. The changes were working, slowly but surely. "You've really turned things around," Naomi said, a hint of admiration in her voice. Amara offered a small smile. "We're not there yet, but it's a start." The sound of footsteps drew their attention as Mary appeared at the door. She hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. "Amara, I just wanted to say thank you," Mary said, her voice sincere, "for everything you've done. Things feel different now, better." Amara stood and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you, Mary. None of this would have been possible without people like you speaking up. Your courage made a difference." Mary nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion, before she excused herself and left. As the day went on, Amara received more signs that her efforts were paying off. Employees stopped by her office to share their thoughts, their optimism evident in their words. Amara felt a sense of accomplishment, but as the sun began to set, her day took an unexpected turn. Naomi entered her office again, holding a plain white envelope. "This was left at the front desk," she said, placing it on Amara's desk. Amara frowned, picking up the envelope and examining it. There was no return address, no name, just her own, typed neatly on the front. "Did anyone see who dropped it off?" she asked. Naomi shook her head. "No, it was just there when the receptionist came back from lunch." Amara opened the envelope carefully, pulling out a single sheet of paper. The note was typed, the words brief and unsettling. "Be careful who you trust. Ethan isn't done yet." Amara stared at the note, her heart sinking slightly as she read it again. The simplicity of the message made it all the more chilling. "Naomi," she said, her voice steady despite the unease creeping in, "make a copy of this and keep it on file. And notify security. I want to know if anyone unusual has been seen around the office." Naomi nodded, her expression serious as she took the note and left the room. Amara leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She had anticipated backlash from Ethan, but the idea that he might be plotting something more deliberate was unsettling. Still, she refused to let fear dictate her actions. If Ethan thought he could intimidate her, he was mistaken. She had come too far, fought too hard, to let him or anyone else undo the progress she had made. As she stared out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Amara felt a renewed sense of determination. She didn't know what Ethan's next move would be, but she was ready for it. Whatever came next, she would face it head-on, just as she always had. The company's atmosphere was transforming. Employees began sharing positive feedback about the diversity training and new policies. At a company luncheon, a longtime employee stood up and said, For the first time, I feel like my voice matters. The applause that followed reminded Amara of the purpose behind her reforms. Yet the anonymous letter lingered in her mind, fueling her unease. Her suspicions were confirmed when Naomi rushed into her office with a blog post accusing Amara of favoritism and mismanagement. "This has Ethan written all over it," Amara said, her resolve hardening as Naomi detailed how Ethan was spreading lies to former clients and reporters. Amara quickly assembled her legal team. Evidence revealed Ethan's attempts to sell false insider information to tarnish her and the company. Armed with proof, Amara filed a lawsuit against him for defamation and breach of contract. The lawsuit snowballed, with clients and employees supporting Amara's case. Soon authorities uncovered additional financial misconduct, leading to Ethan's arrest. As reporters swarmed him, Ethan smirked, declaring, "People like her can't change the system." The public saw his statement as desperation, further solidifying Amara's credibility. Watching the news later, Amara reflected on his words. Changing the system wasn't easy, but progress was possible. Naomi brought her a stack of glowing employee feedback forms. "This is why we're doing this," Amara said, smiling. As the sun set, she stood by her office window, knowing the future was still challenging, but brighter. The company's headquarters was alive with energy as Amara stepped onto the stage for the highly anticipated press conference. Faces of employees, reporters, and stakeholders turned toward her, waiting for her words. The backdrop behind her displayed the new slogan, "Integrity in Excellence." Amara adjusted the microphone and began, her voice steady. "The past months have been transformative. We faced hard truths about our company, and today I'm proud to share that the steps we've taken are already making a difference." She gestured toward the screen, which displayed employees engaged in training, customer testimonials, and revamped stores. "This isn't just about one company. It's a call to action for an entire industry. True luxury isn't defined by exclusion, but by creating spaces where everyone feels valued and seen." Her voice grew stronger. "True power isn't money or status. It's the courage to confront what's wrong and make it right. We're showing that change is possible, and we're just getting started." The applause was deafening. Employees cheered, some visibly moved. Amara took a moment to absorb the energy of the room, feeling pride in what they had achieved together. As the event ended, Amara stepped outside into the cool evening air. Naomi approached her with a small envelope. "This was left for you," Naomi said cautiously. Amara opened it and read the simple, ominous message. "Be careful. There are people who will do anything to stop you." Amara folded the note, her expression calm. She looked out at the city lights, a faint smile on her lips. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready. This story isn't just about one woman's fight to save her company. It's a testament to the power of courage and integrity in the face of adversity. Amara's journey shows us that true leadership means confronting uncomfortable truths and choosing progress over complacency. But what about you? What would you do to create change in a world that resists it? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. The journey doesn't end here.